Rena and I went to Brazil in 1978. And took our 2-year-old daughter with us to begin work in northeast Brazil. And we came home in May of this year. We've changed a little bit. The church gave us a nice send-off in the COVID context. Mask all the way home, but we were able to make it. Church in Patos, we started back in the 1980s, still alive and well under Brazilian leadership. One of the guys who helped us build the church, we call him John Beard. Lives near a cemetery, but he's not ready to go there yet. He married into a young family, a second marriage, and these children without Christ didn't have a Bible. We encouraged the believers there to have services in their house, and they did. Santana de Mangueira, a beautiful little town in the interior, didn't have any church when we started going there in 1983. Now they have a very nice building, and they're meeting there, have been meeting regularly. Even in the COVID context, they continue to have their meetings online. Pastor Paulo, he was saved in Patos. He and his wife have pastored that church for about 18 years. Our last work in Brazil was with the Igreja Batista Bereana, Berean Baptist Church, an older church that another missionary started. They were needing some help with restoration. They had lost about half their members, and the Lord helped us to see that work grow and become stable again, and they're able to support their own pastor. Good crop of young ones coming along. Once in a while, Rena sing in our lighter moments. Normal church ministry there, baptism and discipleship, ladies' choirs that Rena was working with. They helped us put together Wordless Book Keychains. These were 3 seminarians who worked with us. They're all in active ministry now. One's the pastor of the church. Another one became a missionary with Baptist Mid Missions. And another one's working with Wycliffe Missions. There's a young pastor that came. He's like 27 years old and is connected well with the Brazilian people. College for a Day, we took some people from our church there recently. Had the privilege to work along with the Baptist Seminary of the South. I taught Bible classes, and 1 year teaching the book of Exodus, Leviticus, we got a little bit more creative. Did the tabernacle furniture. The students enjoyed working on that. My wife, Rena, she liked to take care of the snack shop. It's one of the shots of doing open-air evangelism with the seminarians, using the Wordless Book keychain that I've already mentioned. Cold turkey visits, but the keychain helps to break the ice. One of the classes that I taught homiletics to these guys. Most of whom were out preaching. At the end of the year, each year we have graduation. From time to time I was involved in other ministries. One of that being going over to Argentina with a young seminarian who loved Brazil. We were evangelizing on the street corner there in Argentina one evening. And now he and his wife are missionaries in Argentina. Adriano and Josie and their 2 little girls. Also, we went into Paraguay. Josiel, still in Bible college, but speaks Spanish, looking to go perhaps into Paraguay as a missionary. On our last visit there, we had the opportunity to share Christ with many Paraguayans who do not know the Lord. Union Grove Baptist Church, where we're presently teaching at Christian Day School, but also thinking about going into pastoral ministry in another church in our older age. So pray for us. Thank you for standing with us through all these years. Just a little word of testimony. I'm from Christiansburg. Became a Christian here in Christiansburg in 1959. I was just a little boy. A few years later, I started attending Faith Missionary Baptist Church in Ernest Birch was the pastor, and it was at that church as a teenager that yielded my life to the Lord to do whatever He wanted me to do. I didn't know that the Lord would direct me after 5 years of Bible college to be a missionary in Brazil through missionary testimony of Russ and Judy Gordon, who'd been in the Northeast for a few years. The Lord directed our hearts to that country, and we went there in 1978 and came back from Brazil after more or less 41 years in the country. Came back from Brazil in June of this year. So what I want to do now is just kind of give you an overview of what we did when we were in Brazil. This map here portrays the great country of Brazil that we went to, as I mentioned already, in 1978. We located here in the northeastern part of Brazil and studied the language in a city called Fortaleza, coastal city in the state of Ceará. Is located here. So Rena and I, my wife, we studied the language there from 1978 to 1979, and then after that we moved to the state of Paraíba. Both of these states are in the northeast, a very dry and arid part of Brazil, about 6 degrees south of the equator. So I've told people in the past that there are only two temperatures in that part of Brazil, hot and really hot. So we were about 6 degrees south of the equator, working in the state of Paraíba. Actually worked in 3 different towns there. We mentored with Russ and Judy Gordon in the town of Souza. Russell had already organized a church there, and we worked along with Russell and Judy for a part of our first term. And at one part of this term, Russ and Judy went to Fortaleza to work and left us all by ourselves there. We were the only Americans in that city of probably about 60,000 people. But we worked in the church that Russ Gordon had started, and I pastored there for 2 years until it was turned over to a Brazilian pastor in 1982. 1982-83, we had our first furlough, and then we went back to Brazil and worked in a city called Patos, which is ducks in Portuguese, and we had the opportunity to begin our first works there in Patos. Actually, we started a church there, didn't know anybody, started on our carport. Actually, my wife Rena, she had the first meeting, Sunday school, there on our carport, and I think the first service we had about 18 kids, because our girls were with us at that time, and they were little, and so there wasn't much problem to get other little kids coming, and after a while some adults started to come in, and we stayed in the town of Patos from 1983 until a few years later when we went up to Fortaleza again. But while we were in Patos, we also opened a church in the town called Santana de Mangueira. Santana de Mangueira. They didn't have any churches there in this town, and we started preaching there on the public square. We couldn't find anyone in the town and community who knew Christ. We couldn't even find anybody that had a Bible. And I'm talking about 1984 now. And we started preaching on the street. Later on, we rented some homes there, and some people started getting saved. And so after a while, we had a little group of believers there. These two places, Patos and Santana de Mangueira, they still have functioning churches there. I'm in pretty frequent contact with the pastor who's in Santana de Mangueira, and they've been, actually they tore down the structure that we built, most of it, and built a nice adequate structure for a church building there. And because of the COVID, right now they are having their services through the WhatsApp on their phones. They're not having in-house services either, but they've been doing a real good job and have singing, have preaching. They do it all through this wonderful apparatus of cell phones. But that's what's happening in that part of Northeast Brazil from works that we had a part in several years ago. After 1970, well, through 1978 on up until 2002, we worked in the Northeast. And once in a while through the years, we would get an invitation from Pastor George Wells about helping in a Bible college in the southern part of Brazil. When I would get these invitations from time to time, V.W. Peters asked me about it one time also. It was something that I really wasn't interested in. I didn't really feel qualified to do that. But once I got to be 50 years old, I thought, well, even though I'm not a great academic missionary, I've got a little bit of mileage on me, and maybe I can share some practical experience with Brazilian young people. So in 2002, we moved from the Northeast down to South Brazil, and went to a city called Pinhais in the state of Paraná. This is about 1,750 miles south of where we were, so we moved out of this very hot, arid, dry region into a region that was lush, green, even frost, and has snow about once every 25 years down here in this part of southern Brazil. So we went down, and from 2002 on up until 2020, we helped in the Bible school there with the Wells, with George and Maxine, and also with Kenneth and Donna Wells. Had the opportunity to work along with them there for several years. And after we were there on up until 2020, we felt that our time in Brazil was phasing out. And actually, our mission has a mandatory retirement policy of once you get to be 70, they want you to come home unless you get special permission to stay on the field. Some missionaries do continue on the field after they reach age 70, but we felt like that the Lord was leading us back to the States, and our church ministry there that we had been in for about 6 or 7 years, helping in a church in this area. It was an older church, and we helped that church in restoration and turned it over to a Brazilian pastor, young Brazilian pastor who had been a student in Bible college. And actually, of the about 7 or 8 churches in the area where we worked here in Paraná, all of the churches had a co-pastor except the one that I had just left, and we felt like that it was time for us to leave and turn it over to the young Brazilian pastor without his being in our shadow or his feeling restrained for some reason or the other because of our presence there. And also in the Bible college ministry, we felt that the Lord was phasing us out. There was less need for us there at the Bible college than there was several years before. One of the things that we did in the Bible college from time to time, I mentioned I put down these other countries. One of the things that I discovered once we moved to Paraná is that our state bordered on 2 other countries, and one was Paraguay, and then one was Argentina. And I would talk with the Brazilians from time to time if they'd ever been to Argentina or if they'd ever been to Paraguay, and most of the times they'd say that they had never been to these countries, and it kind of puzzled me that it seemed to be so easy to go over there. So a few years ago, when my son-in-law was in Brazil for a while, working as a missionary, we got together with one of the Bible college students who had indicated interest in missions in another country. And we drove from the state of Paraná. We drove down to the south a little bit and over into Argentina, and drove across the Uruguay River and right over into Argentina. And the young Brazilian, when he saw Argentina, it was kind of like love at first sight. He had never been in another country. Went across the river. They were speaking Spanish, and he liked Spanish. He was studying Spanish. And we spent 2 nights there in Argentina and got a barge to come back across the river. We'd gone down south a little bit, probably about 70 miles, and then came back across the river, drove back over into Brazil. But to make a long story short, this young Brazilian missionary, a young Brazilian Bible college student, he became a missionary, and he and his wife and 2 little girls are in Argentina now as missionaries. And so Fruit of the Bible College, and we were glad to have an opportunity to go over into Argentina and introduce him. And we were getting to know Argentina also, but they're missionaries in Argentina. Just last year, in one of the classes or one of the chapels that I had at the Bible College, I asked the students if anyone would be interested in going to Paraguay. And that's a country that's easily accessible to Brazilians also. And I put a couple stipulations. I said if you would like to go to Paraguay and visit that country, if you're interested in missions, I said 2 things. I'd like for you to learn a little bit of Spanish. You know, in Brazil they speak Portuguese, but Spanish is a different language. It's easier for Brazilians to transition into Spanish than it is for Americans. But still yet, they have to learn enough to be able to make an understandable gospel presentation. I said, if you learn a little bit of Spanish, enough Spanish to be able to make a simple gospel presentation, and if you raise some support to pay for your meals and your hotel bills, I'll provide the transportation. So a couple guys took me up on the offer, and they studied some Spanish. One of them was actually fluent in Spanish. And so last year, right after the graduation at the Bible College, we drove over into Paraguay and had some good opportunities there to visit some people. Just telling you one thing, the last day that we were there, staying in a little hotel, we decided just to go out into the community and to see what we could see. And I've used little, what we call the wordless book keychains for years in Brazil and also in the States. We took those with some Spanish tracts and just to see what we could find. But we found several homes, people sitting out in front of their homes, and received us very kindly. They were very friendly. These Paraguayans, seeing foreigners, 2 Brazilians and 1 American. But one of the homes that we visited, they had about 8 people out in front of the homes. They were sitting down. They pulled up chairs for us. They had a lot of questions. And the Brazilian guy who was really fluent in Spanish, he communicated with them very well. We were able to present the gospel to them. And they said, anytime that you want to come back, the door is open. You can come back and have a service. So I told these guys after we got home, I said, I won't be coming back as a missionary to Paraguay, but maybe you will, maybe you can. And I don't know that they'll go, but that's one of the things that we've tried to do in the Bible College in Brazil is to help Brazilians get interested in other countries and take the gospel to countries that are probably more needy than Brazil. But Brazil itself is a large country. It's got 210 million people, more or less, and 65% is still considered Roman Catholic. And up until just a few days ago, Brazil has had 187,000 COVID deaths. So it's a country that still needs a lot of prayer, still needs a lot of missionaries, and we're glad for the time that the Lord gave us there. but glad also for the part that you had in supporting us as missionaries in Brazil for a little over 40 years. So that's the presentation that I had about this great country. Keep the people in prayer, and keep Rena and me in your prayers as we have transitioned out of missionary ministry in Brazil to transition, been teaching in a Christian school in Lexington, North Carolina. And it's nothing like teaching well-mannered Bible college students in Brazil. Teaching high school students has been a real learning curve for me, and but I'm supposed to be there until May. But also we'll be candidating at a church in North Carolina in January, and I'll be preaching 5 Sundays there in January to see if the church wants us, and we'll see if we want to be their pastor. So pray for us. Lord bless you.